Thank you for joining for this session today. If you've attended the first session where Adam talked about the kind of overview and umbrella of Microsoft and how things work there, you already know Adam. But if you don't know him, I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker today, Adam Saleh. I've had the pleasure to work with Adam in the past on one of my projects, and I can say that he brings a lot of knowledge into the team and insight to every conversation. So I try and find the time to have insightful conversations with him because every time I learn something new about the Microsoft environment and in general about IT. So Adam is a software architect with over 35 years of experience in Microsoft technologies. He's currently responsible for SharePoint and SharePoint Online at SFU, as well as leading the development of the new AI Sandbox initiative. Very exciting. He's also collaborated with the Microsoft SharePoint product team, including work related to SharePoint Enterprise Platform, which underpins Microsoft Loop. And in addition, Adam is a Microsoft certified trainer, a curriculum designer, and holds GW Master Certificate in project management. He's also an Agile MSF practitioner and has led large-scale IT projects at organizations such as Accenture, NCR, and the state of California. So we're really lucky to have Adam here to continue the part two, talking about the loop. So yeah, let's welcome Adam. And Adam, over to you for your presentation about the loop.
Hello and welcome again. My voice will be a little crackling because I took these shots on Friday and my body went in full defensive mode and I'm feeling like I'm really sick, but hopefully we'll muddle through. If you have been with us in the previous session, I gave sort of a 2,000-foot level overview about the whole M365 space and where Loop fits. I have two reasons for doing that. One is a lot of us who use managed devices may not be able to use certain things that I'll describe today. Primarily this here. If you notice in my taskbar in the very bottom there, I have an icon that shows Loop. So there is a desktop version of Loop. It's just a wrapper for the web version, and that's the direction Microsoft's headed. Teams, Outlook, they are all becoming just a wrapper for the web edition. So whether you access it from the web or from your desktop, they are really the same experience, but it's convenient, it's the status quo, the way we are familiar with the Microsoft platform and how we use it. That is just one caveat. So I started by telling you about the overall ecosystem, and that is in the m365.cloud.microsoft. That is where you can just type office.com or Microsoft365.com. They have rebranded that yet again, and now they call it Copilot. You will have to log in, of course, with your SFU credentials if that's the first time you land there. So that's an important piece of information. And from there, this is the portal from which you can launch any app, including Microsoft Loop, which is the focus of our discussion here. So that's really an important point from just the overall ecosystem point of view. Back to Loop. Just a quick recap for a couple of minutes. Loop is everywhere. Loop is the new sort of fabric that ties all these products together. And the way I like to think about it, I shared in the chat there a link to content that I crafted for this group. It evolved, so you get the latest version. I've been recording sessions for the public and teaching and talking about Loop because I'm really passionate about it. Even Microsoft asked me to come and talk to their crew about it in different groups. It is constantly evolving. Even this last week, they added new features to it. It's constantly changing, and it is really a consequential product. So please take it seriously. And if my sales pitch here didn't convince you, then do a bit more research and take away my advice about it. So what is Loop? Loop, first of all, is everywhere. It's in Teams, it's in Outlook, it's in all places. So what is it? Well, it's a product, obviously. It's in the Microsoft space. The way I like to think about it is if you want to build sort of a mental model for it, it would look something like this. Workspaces, sorry. The workflow goes like this. Workspaces, pages, components and links. That's sort of, this is my latest iteration of the mental model I try to use in describing and dealing with Loop for myself and for my sort of constituents that listen to me. So what is a workspace? We all use SharePoint to some extent on premises or in the cloud. There isn't a whole lot of difference from a structural point of view. A workspace is essentially a SharePoint site. Literally, that's what it is. Anna referred to SPE, the SharePoint embedded product I helped Microsoft over the past couple of years develop, is the underlying infrastructure for Loop and many other cloud native components. So that's a key concept. Loop is a cloud native component. It's one of those new products that were developed specifically for the M365 space. Quickly raise your hand if you ever used OneNote. Nobody? OneNote on the desktop? Ah, perfect. So those of you who know OneNote, you can lower your hand. Thank you. That's the way to communicate because I don't see you. So OneNote is still there, and you can still plug Loop components in OneNote. But this is sort of the new cloud native OneNote. It's the newer, prettier, sexier, whatever you want to call it, and more sort of available to all the different, more integrated, more holistic version of OneNote. And I'll keep drawing parallel to OneNote every now and then where it matters. So I'm glad a bunch of you are already familiar with that, and you will resonate even more. So Workspace then is the equivalent of, since we all know SharePoint, is essentially a SharePoint. It literally is a SharePoint site, but it has more in common with OneDrive than the Teams SharePoint site or the communications SharePoint site that we use. What makes OneDrive special is it's a single website or site collection with a single document library that is dedicated to the individual, the owner. That's OneDrive. Now, actually started this life like that. SPE, SharePoint Embedded, is really a vertical that was copied from OneDrive for those interested in the technical jargon there. SPE, SharePoint Embedded, is the ground upon which it's built, or the storage where everything is. So Workspace is a site that is in SharePoint Embedded. And we call that a container. It's just a new name for a site. So in the SharePoint world, we say site or site collection. In the Loop world, a workspace creates a container because it's self-contained. That's just the new vernacular in the SPE universe. So that's the big container, so to speak. There you can think of the analogy of a OneNote notebook or your OneDrive or a SharePoint site. So that's the first part. Now, as we all know, a document library can contain a whole bunch of stuff. In OneDrive, I can put in PowerPoints, I can put in Excel sheets, etc. The workspace dedicated container, however, it only has one type of content. That is, SPE allows for everything, just like OneDrive, but from a Loop perspective, the only content we have are pages. So the documents in the Loop world are essentially just pages. So workspaces contain pages, and what do we put on those pages? They are not the classic HTML pages. They are slightly different, a very complex structure behind the scenes, but in its simplest form, you can think of it as a surface that's synonymous to a OneNote page. It's really very similar. The one thing that goes for OneNote still is dear to my heart, I haven't stopped using it since 2003 when they launched it, is the fact that it has got really a free-form canvas where you can click anywhere on the page and you can start columns and so on, whereas here it's a bit rigid unless you add a table. So the main distinction between the Loop pages and OneNote pages then is just that. Other than that, we actually have a lot more features in Loop pages, as I'll demonstrate. And then we have components. This is where it can get a little confusing. A component is essentially a bundling mechanism, a packaging mechanism. So if we were to use the SharePoint analogy, workspace being a site and then a page being the equivalent of a SharePoint page, those of you, I presume all of you have used SharePoint to a certain extent, but those of you who are familiar with the design elements of a SharePoint site, we had this thing called a web part. So in here, for example, if we go to our site, the community site, on the page you have these widgets that we call web parts. The equivalent of a web part in the Loop world is what we call a component. Now, a web part in the SharePoint universe, as you well know, it can surface plain content that's embedded, it can surface an entire document library, it can even render entire web pages from other sites within that widget, if you like, or within that web part. Loop components have the same ability. The one thing that is extra, though, beyond that web part notion, is that we can share components. Components are portable, and they are also rendered in all the different clients. So in Outlook, I don't know if you attended the last session, but I demonstrated quickly that we can start things in Outlook. If you look and if you open the chat window in this meeting here, on the right-hand side, you will see that I pasted a loop component, which is essentially a representation of the page that I am presenting from here right now. I can be more granular. I can drill down here and take a portion of this page, like this table here, for example, and I can create a loop component out of it. So a component is essentially a bundling mechanism that will take anything. We'll take an entire page, we'll take the screen. You can see here, I turned that table into a component and immediately put a wrapper around it. And you can see here, these little icons are persistent everywhere. You see a loop component and it shows who's collaborating with me right now live. Another way to use a component. An entire page can be bundled as a component. And that is what I did for you when I put it in the chat there. I simply came in here, I said share a loop component. A few things we can do when we share an entire page. I'm jumping straight into the administrative side of things, but I didn't really plan this. I'm winging it. I planned the structure, but not the flow. So in here, you can specify who has access to it. You can see people with a previously assigned access or everybody in the organization, or you can specify who, if you are still working on it and it's not primed for sharing with everybody, or it's just a collaborative space you want to create for just a few individuals, you can add them in here directly, and that will preclude everybody except for these individuals that you select. And this is integrated with our M365 Intra ID, the Active Directory in the cloud. You can specify what permission level, editor, and you can also set an expiration date. These are all nothing new, and the M365 space, this experience is becoming consistent. Whether you share a Word document or a OneDrive file, they all have the same experience. So it's maturing. As I said, these things didn't exist last year. These are all becoming standard as part of what a component is. So coming back to let me go back to the mental sort of model that I was talking about. So we've got workspaces contain pages. Pages may contain components. They are also shared as components. So the way we integrate, you can share a page link, of course. Components are nice in that they bundle a whole bunch of stuff, including the permissions, which I demonstrated a minute ago, and the expiry dates, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot that is bundled in that component, and it's portable, and it can be rendered, as you just seen in the chat. It can be rendered in a group chat. It can be rendered in Outlook. You can insert it in a message. It's sort of like sharing a OneDrive link. It's not gonna send a copy of the content to the recipient, but rather it will give them access to that link where they can come and operate in that central location, one version of the truth, multiple access points, if you like, right? So that is the component part. Finally, we have link. Because we are in a web environment, everything is disseminated using links. So when I share a component, it manifests itself as a link, really. If you hover over that with your mouse, you can see that it's not really meant for human consumption. So it's not a URL that's quite easily memorable. Those of you who are nerdy and into the weeds, you can see that the first part, the tenant 1SFU, is our tenant.sharepoint.com. That is our landlord's building. And then you've got a whole bunch of stuff, but one that's notable is G/content storage. That is where it's all stored. So all these containers are stored in that SPE, as I mentioned. That is where it's shared from. But ultimately, I shared this via link. And then all that gibberish is where the metadata that is used to discern users' access and expiry date and all that stuff is bundled as this gibberish that you see there. So links are the way we share components, if you like. We can also share pages as a direct page. So what I could do is I could come here to the entire page and say, I want to share a page link. And the same mechanics, the only difference there is this is not gonna be, I'm gonna let everyone have access. You can see it inherited because I shared it as a component. The people who have access to it are the ones who are already in there, but I can say I want to share it with the whole organization. What happened now is it copied a link into my clipboard. I'm gonna paste it in here just for a minute so you can see it. And as you can see, what is nice about loop pages, they also give you sort of a mini view of the pages that you're linking in there. You can see here it tries to render it, but it can't. But what I do, here's a little trick that I learned on my own. It's not documented anywhere as far as I know. If you paste a link in here, I simply go do Control Z, undo. It's going to turn it into a readable URL format, if you like. You can also right click on it and change the hyperlink options. You can see the URL or link preview. You can copy a page as a link as well, right? You can also, of course, bring external links and paste them in here. So a link is a way to share loop pages and components. It is also a way to ingest or insert content from elsewhere in here. So if I were to go, for example, I'm creating a documentation page for a community site here, and I'll say I'm going to copy that URL from there, and I'm going to bring it into this page and paste it in here, right? So you can see it will attempt to render it. It can't. It just shows me the details. It says this is a SharePoint site, blah, blah. So links are really a key component because we are in the web world. We are in the cloud, so everything is done through links. So there is your sort of 2,000-foot level, or like a very high-level mental model, if you like, of what loop building blocks are. We've got a workspace. That's the main container that contains pages. Pages may contain components. Components are also a way for us to share stuff to the outside world. Could contain an entire page. So it's really, it has dual purpose or dual meaning, if you like. So it's important that you conceptualize that. And links, because we are in a web environment, everything is manifested by way of links. And that is explained here in this table. You have access to this document for your reference and you can use it. So how do I use loop? I'm going to jump into this one here for a minute. I know we are short on time and I don't know if we're going to have another session in the future. So teaching you how to fish, so to speak, I created more than one document in here, some with advanced features that I'll leave with you. I'll just point them out right now. I won't drill into them very much. But another way to look at loop is something like this. This is my attempt at infographics with help from Perplexity. You can think of it as basically 4 dimensions. One is the space, which I just described. Basically, workspaces, pages, they are containers for collaborations, and they can be organized by project, right? So whatever subject you fancy. Now, a couple of points here, just self-preservation from an ITES perspective. Because each workspace creates a container, that will consume disk space in the cloud from our tenant. So please be cognizant of that fact. Only create a workspace if you truly believe that you need a new workspace. Otherwise, create pages, and I'll show you how we can organize them in hierarchies like this one that are synonymous to, or very similar to, sections in the OneNote universe, right? So that's just an important governance note that I had to plug. So we've got spaces then, and then we've got the surfaces. That is the touch points. How do we interact with Loop? I already covered teams, and I just showed you also in chat. We can create components. That's what we covered last time, but we can share components and collaborate on them directly from within the chat. But if I go back to my Loop page, I will see everyone working through the chat because, as I said, that was one version of the truth. Outlook, the same thing. If you send an email message to someone with a Loop component embedded and they open that message, they can actually work on that message without having to respond. So they can just work within that because that's sort of like a widget gateway into the original Loop page. They don't have to reply. I mean, it's nice to reply to acknowledge that they received it or something, but they can demonstrate that they are part of that conversation by immediately chiming in. And of course, from an accountability perspective, if you are a supervisor who's sending this to subordinates or a colleague who's waiting on someone for their input, you can see them live. You're all familiar with this from Word and Excel co-authoring features. That also still applies here, as you probably noticed, right? OneNote, I promise to refer to it because a lot of people use OneNote. I'm not going to say ditch OneNote, but that's the general trajectory. Microsoft still has OneNote in a team site. They used to have it prominently featured as a team notebook, etc. But that's being I don't have it on authority, but knowing what I know from being on the other side of the fence with the teams, the product teams, is being de-emphasized. However, you can see they added Copilot there and so on, but you can insert a loop component in here like everywhere else. So that's something I thought I'd mention here. However, why I came here is that we have the notebook where you can start a notebook. That's the equivalent of a workspace. Then we can add sections. I'll explain that equivalency in Loop in a minute, but we have pages in here, and within the page, this is what I miss from OneNote. We don't have the equivalent to this. We are more top-down when it comes to Loop. Here, I used to do this. A few months ago, we didn't have these features, but now we have them: video recording and audio recording. Those were unique to OneNote. So a lot of the OneNote features are being implemented here in Loop. So I suspect in a few iterations, this is going to be the de facto collaboration tool. The reason I pulled it up now is because I don't think I demonstrated the last time. Outlook and Teams and so on, they all have, those are the surfaces from which we access those spaces that are stored in SPE, as I mentioned, right? Now, those are the ones we create. We own, we create, we instigate. I'll show you how to start from scratch and go through it in a few minutes. But those are the me stuff, the I stuff, the you stuff. Then there are components that also you and me, but indirectly, we don't call them loop. We don't think loop as we are instigating or creating those loop components, but rather they are created by the respective applications. Now, just show of hands real quick here. How many of you use Planner for your project management or your task management? Another question, how many of you have Copilot licenses or use Copilot at some level? And just show of hands. If you are in the process of acquiring a license or have intention to, please raise your hand as well. I just want to get a tally of how many of you are interested in that. All right, roughly the same. All right, so the reason I'm mentioning that is, I don't know if you noticed or if you were looking, in the M365 portal, the landing page, they have rebranded that M365 Copilot. Although this is where I access all the apps from, right? We have got the entire ecosystem of the M365 spaces here, but the URL is m365.cloud.microsoft. If you type office.com, it will bring you here, etc. So Copilot is really where they're pushing everything. That's the new sort of communication. In the old days, we used the different user interfaces to gather information. But search, Google became a verb, right? And then Bing. And now chat with it is the new approach. So Copilot is sort of the new user interface, if you like. Even in Windows, they just launched it in Canada. It was up in the US for a few months. We have this Windows Copilot, which can even take over your machine and do tasks for you and so on. So Copilot is sort of the new de facto interface, and it's multimodal. In the Windows version, it actually has vision. I suspect that will come here as well, so it can see what you see and so on and so forth. Copilot relies very heavily on a loop under the hood for its work. That's all I was going to point out here. So there are a bunch of applications that will sync the components in real time from that application's user interface, let's say Planner or Copilot or even Whiteboard. They will synchronize with Loop. They create a Loop component and then they paste the content. They synchronize it back and forth between the applications, let's say Planners here for argument's sake, and Loop behind the scenes. Now, the files are a bit scattered all over the place, which can be a bit challenging, but I'll cover some of that in this session very soon. There are certain components that do require Copilot for them to integrate well with Loop. I don't know where is that headed, but as it stands now, you have to have the paid M365 Copilot license to use certain features. although everyone has M365 Copilot for free these days, but it's limited in what you can do with it. So those are the systems, sort of. And I think I covered the intelligence part here. I'll just finish by saying Copilot helps us in many ways. It's a prerequisite for certain integrations. Copilot relies on OneNote for capturing or freezing at its output. Furthermore, it is also integrated with Loop. So within Loop itself, as I'm working here, I can come and say, hey, Copilot, help me with this or that, right? You can see it's here as well. We have the chat window. This is available for you whether you paid or not, the one on the right. But the ability to read the content and work with you on that content, i.e. be your co-pilot, truly collaborating, seeing what you see in the same cockpit, that feature is only available if you have the paid M365 license. That's really the difference between the two, by the way. There's a lot more to it than that, but if you just wanted a one-phrase explanation of the difference between the two, is you have to upload documents into them still within our tenant. The other one requires the paid license. Use Graph for those of you who care behind the scenes. It has full access to everything we access, including interactive documents. So that is the intelligence part, if you like. Again, these groupings are not prescriptive. They are not by Microsoft. I came up with those from experience and thinking about it a little bit. This is a mind map of pretty much the same thing, but a little more drilled down into it. However, the reason I have these two, I pulled these two now, although I have those in the advanced section and I leave them with you, is part of my sales pitch. We call that dog fooding, basically practicing what we preach, right? And the reason I'm excited about Loop is things like this. It took me probably 4 hours altogether to put all this stuff together. I mean, granted, I had a lot of help. I have AI agents that help me. I have 4 different tools that I use from different vendors, but the bottom line is to capture all that and present it like this, I rely on Loop. And here is, if you are in doubt, here is a live example of, I'm using it to present right now. I can expand the surface, I can zoom in, I just hold the control key down and use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out and so on. So a really powerful tool. What you're looking at here is components, essentially. You will see there is a box around it, unlike this one here is an image. A simple screenshot of an HTML page that I created. I crafted this using HTML. That's an interactive page that I'm working on. It's not ready yet, but I thought I'd share the screenshot of that. But this one here is something called Mermaid. It is code to diagramming as code, if you like. It's been around for 3+ years in the developer space, Mermaid.js, but now it's a first-class citizen, maybe 0.8 class citizen of Loop, because it's not more up to date with the Mermaid.js developments happening out there, but really cool for visualization. I use it all the time for things like this in my practice. So that is sort of the different categorizations, if you like, at a very high level. Now let's zoom in a little bit on, okay, I talked about the mental model that I use, workspaces. So how do you start by using Loop? Now, you are already using Loop, as I mentioned. Right now we are using Loop because it's in the chat, because your fearless leadership here have created an agenda in the meeting invite. That agenda is a Loop component, right? We are using Loop already, but if you wanted to use Loop in a purest sense, and using this mental model that I described, you want to start with a workspace, then you want to go to creating pages, which you can organize into sections, and then you share those as components. You could also plug in components. You share those as components or pages using links, right? So how do we go about that? The first thing to do, now everyone should be able to do this. You don't need to follow along. I have the exact steps and the mini guide for you on how to go about it. But if you feel compelled to follow along, please go ahead. You're welcome to post questions later in the chat. I'll monitor it and we can respond to those. For the sake of time, I will just zip through the steps quickly here. So the first thing to do is, again, for the sake of governance and lack of proliferation and so on, you decide whether you need a new workspace or not. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you need a new workspace, then you need to have a few things that you define. Think your actual physical binder or folder in the file system or SharePoint site. What is it for, etc. A bit of metadata that you jot down mentally or using a loop page now that you're familiar with it, right? That's really important. What is it for? And then you go ahead and say create new. That's it. Now in the create new, as you can see here, I may have influenced those guys through our many discussions. That is the mental model you will see here. It's sort of a depiction of it. You have the new workspace, you've got a page, you've got a link. You can add a link here. As you can see, I don't know if it's clear enough in the shared screen, but what you will see here is this is the same. See the mini guide here? The content is really the same as this one, but this one has this little link icon on it. So it shows that loop icon, and then on top of it, there is that infinity, or it looks like an infinity, it's two arrows connected. It's a link icon. So this is a link. So you can link to other pages. Again, for the sake of centralization, don't go copying content because that will defy the whole purpose of having a central location. So let's say if we have a big project and then we start creating workspaces for the different teams or groups on a project or deliverables, you don't need, as a project manager, to copy the content. You can simply point to those, and your workspace acts as the table of content or the master binder that just points to the individual binders underneath it, right? So that is why you would want to create a link here. A page obviously will create a page in the existing and the currently open workspace. You can also do it from here. The page and link can be added into the currently open workspace from here. How do I know what workspace I'm on? Right there, it says loop series, and on the left hand side here you can see that it says loop series. This is a dedicated workspace that I'm gonna keep developing and keep an eye on it. I have a lot of material actually elsewhere that I created over the past couple of years, but a lot of it already is obsolete. I have a whole bunch of stuff that I created that I am migrating into this space and updating as needed. You can add pages from here or links. Let's start at the very top. We want to work on a new workspace that is dedicated to a certain project. This is one of them. When I embarked on creating a series, this for me is a bunch of courses, and I'm sure a lot of you, if you are educators or support educators, you know what I'm talking about. We usually go through, define the course outline, define the lesson plans, so there's a whole lot of work that goes in creating that curriculum. I'm trained curriculum designer, so I'm a bit fluent in this stuff. But generally speaking, you can go through all those steps using OneNote. If you did that in the past, then it's almost one-to-one mapping. So we go, first things first, we go ahead and create a new workspace. We give it a name, and you can choose a nice little icon here, and you can also pick a different cover. I suspect it's only a matter of time again before they add an upload button so you can add your own covers, but I guess from a standardization perspective, they don't want people uploading 1 gig JPEGs or something like that. But there's plenty to choose from here. You can pick a nice banner there, you give it a name and something more meaningful, obviously, and then you can immediately invite collaborators to it. It's like creating an MS Teams team, but this is specifically for Loop. So in there you can go ahead and do that. You can also add immediately bootstrap this by adding content that you already created. This is very limited functionality that will probably evolve. But as you can see here, it shows the most recent ones that I've been working on, and it shows them here. I can simply select a few and then add them, or I can just start with a blank one. Those of you who are deep in the SharePoint universe, a SharePoint site has to have at least, site collection has to have at least one site, a library or a pages library has to have one page in order for us to navigate to it. So we have to have at least one page so we can start working on it. And that's what happened happened here, it created a new workspace for me that is called Tempo Delete Me, and it created a page that is called Untitled. Those of you, again, familiar with OneNote, they modeled a lot of the concepts around OneNote. The page title is determined by what is in the title and the content. So in here, if I say page 1, I will take a few seconds. Remember, we are in the cloud, no instant gratification. It takes time to go up and sync and so on and so forth. So I can create a page like that. And then I can add more pages. You can see I have the plus here, or up here is the same one. Or I can click this ellipsis and say create a new subpage. So that's how we create subpages. I can add a subpage here, and I'm going to call this page 1.1, and that will be renamed accordingly, and so on. You can drill down up to 5 levels. From the root to the bottom, it's up to 5 levels. That's it. You cannot go beyond that, and I think that's plenty from a structure point of view. So I'm going to add another one here, and I'm going to call this page 2.2. And there I have those pages. Now let's say I have pages elsewhere, or I did this, I created a page here. I'm going to call this page TBD, and I have a few of those. Now, if I wanted to copy a bunch of pages, you can just click on the ellipsis here, the 3 dots, and I say duplicate. It's going to go ahead and create a copy. So that's a quick way for you to create duplicates. If you created a really nice page that can serve as a template for others, then instead of duplicate, you can save it as template. So now we are working on pages. Workspaces, that's it. There isn't much more to do on them. You just create a workspace, maybe add an icon or a background and so on, or a banner, and then we drill down into pages. You add pages in there and you structure them. You save one as a template to spin new pages from. And while I'm templates, when I start a new page, I have these predefined templates to begin with. So I don't have to start from scratch. I can simply pick one of these. There is an entire gallery here that shows you a whole bunch of stuff that Microsoft has created and have them ready for us. So a quick way for you to learn about what can be on that page is simply to start spinning up new pages from these templates and browse through. If you are like me, learn by doing, that is a quick way to learn. I have no time to cover everything that we can plug into a page, but here you go. This is an example of project planning page. I'll say use this template, and boom, it gives me a boilerplate from which I can start my project planning here. All right, there you go. Again, all PM sort of exposed, PM practice exposed. You can see roles, project context, etc. It takes that guesswork out of the process, and we all like to use acronyms, and that leads to inconsistency and so on. This standardize the practice. In cohorts in ITS, we have this DTO group that have project management practice. So, and they have a whole bunch of templates. This is one of the tools that you could simply adopt rather, right? You don't have to start from scratch, and it has the main sort of deliverables from a project manager point of view and so on. So it's really convenient. That is a page template. So pages, then you can just add a page, start with a template. You can restructure those as follows. You can simply drag this page and hover over the next one, and you will see 2 things happen. Either it becomes a rectangle. I don't know if you are not sort of color challenged. You will see there's a rectangle around page 1 here in the navigation bar where I'm dragging. You just left click on it and then drag it and try to drop it. Keep the left mouse button clicked and then hover over the next page. The rectangle means this will turn into a sub page of page 1. And boom, done. That's how you restructure pages. So you can go ahead and create stuff, and then you decide, oh, you know what, maybe I need to create a new section, and this page should move into that section. No problem. You can always restructure that after the fact, right? And I'm going to bring this back, and I say, no, this one belongs here. I can drop it in there. When I am dragging the page, let me create a new one real quick here. I created this untitled one. When I'm dragging the untitled one, the other thing that will happen is if I move away from that rectangle, it becomes this straight line or a divider. That is where it's going to insert it. So in this case, because it's under page 1, it's going to be a child of page 1, but a sibling of page 1.1. So it's that level 1.1. If I go under this one here, it's going to be under 1.1, which means it is a sibling of, this should be 1, 2, 2, 1 rather. Anyhow, so that is how we structure the pages, and that creates what we call sections. When you share this as a page or as a component, unless people have access to the parent, they won't see the pages underneath it. So sharing a top page does not necessarily share all the lower elements for it. When you create a component out of this, it's not going to create a component with the page and sub-pages, because a component's boundary is a page or less. So a component can contain a table, etc., or a page. That's it. Multiple pages, we are not there yet. Maybe it will happen, maybe not, I don't know, but that is one limitation here that you need to be aware of. Just because you shared this page that you think of as a section, that doesn't mean people will have access to the pages underneath it. Just be mindful of that. So that's pages. Now, you have a very good head start, as I said, with templates, but let me just drill down a little bit and show you how I use it, what I plug in into the page. Depending on what the task is, universally, you can do this. You can either right-click. You have a few options there. Ultimately, though, /. That is the key. That is the key to everything in this environment. When you hit /.
Adam, you want to show that and then we can respond.
I thought it would be something. If there's something urgent, yeah, just post it in the, unless you can't hear me or something, raise your hand. All right, so / is how we open the goodie bag. And in here, you can see you've got table, you've got checklist. So I'm going to add a table, boom. Then table is a table, just like in Word and Excel, you have the same sort of functionality. You can add columns. Right-clicking is very interactive. Hovering over gives you a few things as well. You can add new rows and so on. This one here, so the navigation is two-part. Right-click here or hover over it. Here is for the entire object. So for the entire table, you can do certain things. If it is a task list, for example, I'm going to do task here. You will see that the options here are different than the options for the table. And for the task list, you can switch between board, like a Kanban board, right, a task board, where you can create buckets and so on and so forth. So you can literally create, I use this feature all the time until they integrated it into a planner later. This was it. And it used to integrate with Outlook's To-Do and Personal Planner, but now it's integrated with Planner proper. So that's one way. And then there are these little, whenever you see an ellipsis, that is, again, a set of options that are collapsed under that, right? This will expand it and it will give you the details. This is sort of like double clicking on the item so you can see a bigger view. You can copy a link to this particular task and share it and so on. So you can really drill down, but the navigation mechanism is consistent with all the other M365 experiences, however unique to this environment. You can add a signee in here. I'm going to add Anna. What is going to happen there is just like you would in comments in Word or in Planner, what is going to happen? You can see it's saying, hey, Anna does not have access to this. You want to share, you may get warning like that and so on. But what happens here is Anna will get an email saying that you are assigned this task with a link to the page and so on. So that is how it's tightly integrated with the M365 space. A few things so those are really important, but there are a few things that I want to mention here. You can insert a calendar, you can insert progress bar. So it's really geared towards project management. A lot of it is right in here, and some of those are already plugged into some of those templates. And then you've got things like Mermaid. That is the one I was talking about. This is part of a bigger bucket called code, where you can plug in code, and if it knows how to interpret it, it's going to render it for you. So if it is HTML, it will render it. If it is Java, it doesn't know how to render it, but it will nicely format it for you and so on. But Mermaid is great. I use Mermaid all the time. Go ask Copilot or find on the web. You can copy paste Mermaid syntax in here, and in the most part, it will honor it. It's 1.5 steps behind or so. It's a little behind the most recent Mermaid syntax, but it works in the most part. I use it a lot for documentation, for design. So whether you are a BA or you are a product developer or you're a project manager, this is a great way to create visuals, very compelling visuals. I gave you examples in the Loop series. In here you have a bunch of examples in the advanced one here. You've got things like mind maps, you've got things like diagrams, you've got timelines. So it's a very effective way to create documentation. And then all you have to do is copy, Control A, Control C, paste it in Microsoft Word. You can simply Control A, Control C, Control V into Microsoft Word. It will bring it as you see it. WYSIWYG. Really beautiful, and that is what I do, and I want to share it with people outside the organization who don't have access to Loop. If you want to share it with external parties or people who are not savvy or up the chain, who are suits that don't have time for going to Loop and so on, you can paste it into Word and send it to them. The one caveat is for Mermaid or anything that is code generated, it does not translate well. So what you need to do is copy an image. These are again tricks I learned on my own. It's not documented, just by experience. You hide this, you remove it, and use the image. That's another tip for you if you are in the habit of using Mermaid. And we are almost right on time, so I'm gonna pause there. We don't have time for questions, but if you have questions, please post them there. I'm sure we'll address them. And I am recording this, so I am gonna maybe do a little bit of editing on it and post it back in the channel, so stay tuned. If you click on it, it will say it's not there, right?
Great. Thank you, Adam, so much, and thank you everyone for joining the session. Hopefully you enjoyed as much as I did. If you have any questions, as Adam mentioned, you can post it in the chat. You can monitor and answer. We've got a few questions that we haven't had the chance to get to, and Adam will respond to those. If you have any additional, please feel free to add to the chat as well. I appreciate your time, and hopefully this was really interesting and useful session for you. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.